Hello, and welcome to Bottom Line Design, a place where we discuss the intersection of business and design. I'm your host, Harrison Tellion. My co-founder and co-host, Agree, is away and will be missed. With us today is my talented friend, Julian Marshall. He's a DC-born, NYC-based film director who has a love for all things art, F1, snowboarding, and skateboarding. He's a fellow technophile and passionate about political activism. During his time at RISD, he worked under the tutelage of famed street artist Shepard Fairey at Obey Giant and Wes Anderson on Moonrise Kingdom. He's directed the award-winning narrative film Obey the Giant and won 2 Webbies for his film We Are George Floyd, about the 2020 BLM protest. His dynamic style has landed him clients such as Google, Under Armour, Amazon, Ford, Intel, Spectrum, Toyota, Nissan, yada, 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 like huge brands. He's a wonderful human being, and we are very, very grateful to have him on the show. Julian, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So just diving right into it, can you tell us a bit about the Julian growing up and maybe any moments or people that shaped your character?
Yeah. I can't talk about growing up without talking about skateboarding and the impact that had on my life. I think I started skating when I was 9 years old, and that's what made me pick up a camera for the first time. And it very much shaped my point of view on the world, just exploring on a skateboard and filming and learning the craft of filmmaking. In terms of people that are really important to me, I had a really unbelievable art teacher growing up named Stephen Ruckert. I went to this prep school in DC, and it was very fortunate that they had a great art program because of Stephen Ruckert, and he actually went to RISD back in the 70s and is who inspired me to go to RISD.
So, oh, I didn't know that. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so was that the time where and do you still keep in contact with him today?
Yeah, regularly.
Very nice. Okay. So just diving a little bit deeper into that, how did you make that? You started off with your interest in film from skateboarding. How long did that carry you up? And then how did you make that jump from 0 to 1, like from passion to professional?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. Like, trying to think back. So it's probably like 9 years of shooting skate videos, somewhere around there. And then I kind of transitioned into shooting snowboard videos. Just got completely sucked in the world of snowboarding, which I started snowboarding roughly around the time that I started skateboarding, maybe even a year before. But kind of the leap into the professional side of things was that, all of a sudden I started getting paid to shoot snowboard videos and getting paid to travel around and shoot professional snowboarders. And that's kind of when I started to learn, oh, wow, this could be a profession. This could be a way to make money doing what I love. And then, the next step from there was learning classical directing, going to film school, and just kind of carrying all of these things together.
So some like sub questions on that. Who was the first person that cut your first check and believed in you? And then what did you have to unlearn when you went from filming for skateboard and skateboarders and snowboarders to then being classically trained?
So first check, just working in general, or first check, like me making content to make money?
Let's do both.
My first job in the general field, I worked for ABC 7 in Roslyn, Virginia. I think that was after my freshman year of high school. But actually making content, I think it was maybe Neff Headwear back when I was at RISD. I had met Torstein Orgmo, Norwegian pro snowboarder, legend in the sport. And some of his sponsors started to pay me to go shoot him.
Very cool. And like for those that don't that are maybe like trying to like break into industry, that seems like a very linear path, but I'm sure there are moments in between there that led you to that moment. What were some of those moments that kind of took you to meeting him? Was it just networking? Was it putting yourself out there in uncomfortable situations? What were those nuances like?
They're actually like great. There's a great story behind this specifically, and then in general, like there are a couple of just like key turning points in my life where you do something crazy and risky that ends up paying off. And there are plenty of times you do that end up screwing you. But in this case, it's funny. Like I was a huge fan of Torstein growing up, and I was in Tahoe snowboarding with a buddy who lived there, who I grew up with, and I looked up, and Torstein was 2 lifts ahead of us on the ski lift. And it's kind of funny. I think I had my camera on me at the time, but the lift stopped. He was the last person. He hopped off and started riding, and the lift fucking stopped. And I'm looking at this. I'm like, I want to meet this guy. Holy crap! I jumped off the ski lift, which is like hilarious.
How many feet? That's dangerous stuff. How many feet above? Or you just like, I don't care. I'm doing this.
It was safe enough I didn't get hurt.
Yeah, okay. Or hurt that day. Or feeling it that day.
I've jumped off of lifts intentionally from much higher heights, but that one was like a pretty reasonable spot to jump from. And I basically just chased him down and found him. Was like, hey, do you want to film? And that day we just did a ton of laps. I cut a video, and that just everything just kind of literally snowballed from there.
No fun, good fun.
Yeah.
Let's just dive a little bit deeper into that. So set the stage for us. You had just jumped off. Did you chase him down the hill?
Yeah, I rode after him.
And then show him footage.
No, I rode after him. It was just like, hey, I've been shooting snowboarding for a while. Do you want to do a couple laps?
How do you receive that? What was his reaction?
Oh, he was super down. Really, such a nice guy. It's just kind of crazy to see from there what he did for the sport. A lot of firsts. He was the first snowboarder to do a triple cork on a snowboard, and in competition, he won X Games over and over and over and over again. And the cool thing was getting to be there with him for that. He went to the Olympics. He ended up getting injured in practice at the first Olympics that snowboarding was in. He very likely could have won the Olympics if that hadn't happened. But, to see him go from that point all the way to the Olympics was amazing.
So in my mind, I almost view that as kind of like, did you define that moment as like, holy cow, I could be doing this for the rest of my life? Or was it a different moment with someone else?
I kind of always knew I wanted to do this for my whole life. I'm like kind of weird and stupid in that way. Or like when I first got into it, it was an obsession. It was a distraction from everything, which is a huge problem in high school. It's like all I want to do is spend my time making films. And I went to a really rigorous school that wasn't as interested in me doing that.
Yeah. How did your teachers react to how did your teachers put up with you? It sounds.
At a certain point, I think they kind of gave up on me, to be perfectly honest. Especially once I, got into RISD, and it's very clear that that's where I was going.
Did you find that teachers' attitudes or people that maybe didn't give you a time of day, maybe that perception was shifting when you got the vote of confidence from RISD, or did it come through your work?
I think for some of them it shifted. For some of them, they just didn't understand it in general. They just didn't understand pursuing the arts. And that's just, the kind of school it was at the time.
How'd that make you feel, that perception? Or were you just like, hater shades on?
It was challenging. It was really challenging. But at the same time, like you kind of need something to push against as an artist. In a way that school made me who I am. I don't know, like if things had just been like really easy and smooth sailing, if I'd be where I am right now.
Sure. Yeah, totally agree. So your film, We Are George Floyd, it won 2 Webbies. Pretty impressive stuff. What inspired you to take on such a powerful and timely topic? And what impact do you hope that your film has had?
It's kind of funny as I was talking about like turning points before. This is one that has a very similar impetus or turning point to me jumping off a ski lift to follow a snowboarder.
Yeah,
So you set the stage. It's the middle of COVID. I personally had just been like barricaded inside for most of it. And then after George Floyd's murder, I was like, holy crap! We need to go out and do something about this. And that was what finally got me outside. Um, uh, and like in that moment, there was so much. Um, Everyone was so emotional in different ways. Some people were, filled with sorrow. Some people were filled with rage. And I realized like I needed to make something to help people channel how they were feeling and use that productively to actually solve the problem. And so, what it meant was going out with my camera, just me, myself, and shooting. And it just happened that, I landed dead smack in the middle of some of the craziest stuff that happened, and
I remember
making
that
that
shot.
making
Was
that
it that opening
choice.
shot? It was
Yeah.
just like it really captured the polarity. Like I'm getting goosebumps talking about, because it just really captured in that first 5 or 6 seconds. It just captured the emotional raw sense of what was going on.
Mhm.
Like how did you know what to capture when, or was a little bit of it luck, or talk to me a little about that.
Well, it's interesting. I really don't start any of my personal projects without knowing what I want to say. Because when you know what you want to say, then you become really sensitive to the world around you, and kind of know what to follow, and know, if you know how you want to make people feel, then it becomes very clear how you capture something and what you capture. Um, so, in this case, kind of as I said, I wanted to make this project, and basically to keep people from lighting the city on fire, and instead take that energy and go vote. Get out and do something about it. And so that like very much colored the way that I shot that film. Yeah.
Yeah, I think during that time, I remember I was part of some of those protests. They were all over the city. There was multiple ones, but I do remember like this feeling of it was almost like a frightened feeling that if something doesn't change, and I still think that feeling is quite prevalent today. how
You talk about
how has your yeah, like how has your film kind of like pulled through that emotional state as it was captured in the moment, and how do you retro on it, like how are you looking at it today?
I mean, I think it definitely had an impact on people because it did end up kind of going reasonably viral on the internet.
Modest of you. Yeah, it did go viral.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's different scales of viral, of course. It's not like it got 100 million views. Um,
It's hard to
but
hit beast categories.
but it did spread on a lot of the right channels. I think the most important thing is for people to not forget how that felt in that moment. And I think that the film is really successful at putting you back into the emotional state of that moment in time. And I think that we're going to need that going into the next year, because we've had, these 3, 4 quiet years for everyone just to reflect on the past 8 years, and be like, what do we want? What do we want America to look like? We've seen the Supreme Court flip completely out of balance. And now we're going into another key election year where there's a lot at stake, depending on who the Republicans nominate, depending on who the Democrats nominate. And so, it's like, if hypothetically Donald Trump was the nominee again, we need people to wake up and remember how that felt, not be desensitized to it, and decide, what we want the next 4 years of this country to look like. Um, Uh, and so, that I think is like the legacy of that film is allowing people to return to that moment.
Do you find, or I guess it's like a two-part like question is like, do you find that people are still coming back to you, you know, sharing how that film kind of made them feel, or do you feel, or and then a second question is like, you know, what would you have wanted to capture differently, or was it just right, you know?
Yeah, people. I mean, still today, I get. I've had other filmmakers reach out to me to license footage because there's kind of no one else that captured that moment that way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so it is still, I think, in people's minds. In terms of like how you know, if I would capture anything differently, I mean, to be honest, no, because it was just an honest reaction to what was happening in my life.
Yeah.
And I put myself into making that film 100% in every way. So yeah, there's not really anything I would change. Everything locked in the way that it should, down to like the Johan Johansson score that I used in it, and his estate and Alcon, who owned the rights to it, coming together and licensing that to me. For very little, because of how meaningful that was and how much that helped build the tone of the story. Everything just kind of came together very nicely to tell that story.
And you know, what was there anyone uh that was most that when they reached out to you that that meant just the world? Like tell me about that person. Tell me about those feelings
Yeah, I mean,
that your film drew.
I think for me, getting to show that film to Cornell West and getting to show that film to Killer Mike, whose excerpts I use, and getting their support in putting that film out was really important to me, and that's kind of what really mattered. Was like, when you use someone's words and you contextualize them, you want to make sure that that's something they're on board with, and to have their support in the way that I contextualized their speeches felt really good.
Yeah, and you know, you brought up like this state of um we are kind of moving into a world where it's almost like a flashpoint right now in history. I think like for the next century, we're going to be looking at this moment in time as kind of like the peak of decisions that could be made, either good or bad, depending on what side you're coming it from. But, you know, politics aside, I think like I would love to hear your perspective on how film, and then we can move on to some of the other questions. But I would love just on this topic, like how are you seeing film shape perceptions in topics around race? You know, in a world where it's so decisive right now, and it's such a hot topic.
Hmm. Um, yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple ways to unpack that. One of them is, when you're talking about race and film, and for me, I can start out by speaking about the African American experience as it regards to film, and then branch out from there. But film for the last 100 plus years that it's existed, um, for the vast majority of that, it's been in some ways like an inherently racist medium. And I say that, the way that I define racism is, it's not just like a single act, like calling someone the N word or something like that. Racism is contributing to a system that keeps an entire people down, or that subjugates an entire people. And it's interesting. So like the beginnings of film, you have really insensitive film stocks. So like 50 ISO film, where you had to use a ton of light just to bring people up to exposure to be captured. And what that meant was that dark skin either just fell into the shadows entirely, or had to be, completely blasted and overlit. And so that all is to say that it isn't until, the modern era of more sensitive film stocks and then digital cinematography that we've even been able to portray Black people on screen properly.
Whoa.
And I think one of the best examples of this is like what Barry Jenkins did with Moonlight. The way that, so like you take white skin tones. White skin tones, you light them directly, and you light it as a positive object. Whereas with black skin, you're not lighting black skin, you are reflecting an environment in black skin in order to properly light it. And it makes you, the result of that gives you a totally different visual experience of seeing Black people. And so, I think that now we're entering this moment where finally we're getting to have where we're starting to get better representation in front of the camera on screen, and we're starting to get better representation behind the camera, which are two very different things. Behind the camera, that's Black people getting to tell whatever story they want to tell. That's not Black people getting to tell Black stories. That's Black people getting to do whatever they want. We're at the beginnings of that. And then on screen, we're at the beginnings of what we see on screen actually reflecting reality and the reality of our world. So that's something that I'm excited about. I think the most important thing, though, is for that not to be this blip that just reverts to the mean, but for that to be sustained change. With all of this stuff, I look at like what is the rate of change, and there are some places where diversity programs are really blossoming, and then some that are like a complete unbelievable false promise.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah.
Like what are some of the ones that are working? And then actually in that same vein, I remember reading that Oprah Winfrey was one of the first like oddball pioneers in Black skin being represented accurately on film.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only by sheer willpower by her to work with the production team to make sure that everything was accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other people that come to mind that are pushing that representation, not only from a technical standpoint, but also from a narrative standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, you can, as I mentioned, like Barry Jenkins is a huge one. Ryan Coogler is another. I mean, there's so many right now, but I think that Donald Glover as well. If I could name a whole ton, but I think those are the three people that to me
I
are
love when
really
you're referring
pushing
to
on it
Brown.
hard. Yeah.
You've worked with major brands like Google and Amazon. What do you think makes a brand stand out in today's oversaturated market?
I think that it's so easy to get lost in the weeds these days. But everything for me comes, when you're talking about branding, comes back to like, why do you do what you do? Like that's how you build culture. That's how you build evangelism. That's how you empower people to share. Is when whatever it is you do or whatever it is you make, like how does that impact someone's life? How does that change the way they see the world? So it's like it's interesting. Like in the case of, I think they're really really good examples of this. But like you take Amazon for instance, like Jeff Bezos is very clear in what Amazon is. Amazon's goal is to provide the best experience to its customers possible. And it's very clear why it's grown the way that it has with regards to that why.
I feel like he's able to get away with like modern day indentured servitude in some of his warehouses, though, like hiding behind the customer's perspective. Do you think that when you're making some of these commercials or pieces for these brands, how much of their ethics kind of come in, or is it about the people that you're working with and their values and their ethics? Because obviously, like, not everyone at Amazon is like, about like taking advantage. I mean, there's plenty of people that I'm friends with that work at Amazon that say that it is wonderful, and obviously everyone knows like the loud voices are always getting more attention.
Mm-hmm. I mean, ethics are so important to me. There's plenty of work that I've turned down because I just have a hard line in the sand that I draw with regards to ethics. And that's just one of those things. It's about integrity. It's about, like all you live and you die, and like your integrity is the only thing that kind of lives on. Yeah.
Can you tell me about a time, without naming any names, if you want to, you can put them on blast, but can you tell me about a time that maybe a client wanted you to do something, or maybe a client approached you that it just wasn't the vibe?
Yeah. There was a very, very large brand that approached us to do a spot, and the message of it was just completely divorced from the reality of what this brand actually does.
Whoa.
It was a very big campaign, and I was just like, I'm not pitching on this.
Wow.
Yeah, where it's just like I'm not going to be a part of making propaganda.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah. And like everything is propaganda, but like actual propaganda.
Where do you draw the line? Actually, I guess it's more of a question of like balance. Like, how do you balance not sensationalizing something? And I was bringing up the example of when you see some of these commercials for cars, let's say, or maybe like Apple's MacBooks, or like their new HomePod 2, like kind of like spatial awareness. You see like all these dots kind of like panning out, or you see that 4x4 like running over dunes. But when I go outside and I'm in the meatpacking district and I see a 4x4, like a 4x4, like Ford Lightning, I'm like, this guy's not hitting 160 miles per hour over some dunes. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah. Well, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Each brand has a different relationship to, how aspirational they want to be, like stuff like that. Real world examples. So, like Toyota, for instance, like they don't want their cars doing anything that beyond what they do naturally, and that can come down to the way that the ambient light sensors work on the car to tell the lights when to be on and off. It's like they want the car to be portrayed exactly as it operates, is the best way to put it. Whereas a company like Jeep, they want to show it going off road, kicking up sand and dirt, climbing rocks in a very aspirational way.
Not in the meatpacking district or the Delaware at Javits Center.
It's something that speaks to the people that buy Jeeps. Like, you want to know that if you had to, your car can do that. It's like products that are over-engineered, showing that like astronauts can use something. It's like that changes your frame of reference to a product. And so I think in this case, it's like brands knowing who they're talking to, and like what resonates with them. Toyota knows that a soccer mom buying a Sienna isn't going to be attracted by showing a Sienna jumping off a cliff.
Yeah, right. Maybe not yet, at least. So it does sound like you've worked with brands that have kind of outlined principles. Are there any brands out there? Of course, you don't have to name names, but like, are there any brands out there or companies you've worked with where you have had to approach them after they've approached you and kind of request principles? And what are some of your principles?
Yeah, I mean, that's the first thing I always do. So all these brands have brand Bibles that are extremely specific for a lot of these
Mm,
big brands, down to the colors they use, their typography, the way that the typography is set, different down to like the focal length of like lens choice for in the case of cars. Like what focal length to use at what angle of the car, which angles are nose, which angles, because they have done the studies to figure out how this stuff makes people feel, which of course, like, you know, putting a camera up at 10 feet on a car as opposed to putting it a foot off the ground feels very different. So they have all these rules, and project by project, you kind of you start with that book, and then you say, all right, what of this is really solid for this project? What of this do we need to stray away from in order to tell the story we're telling most effectively? Um, in terms of rules that I have personally, um, so much of it is about sensitivity and listening to something on a project by project basis. For me, everything starts from, uh, what are you trying to say? How do you want to make people feel? Sorry, what are you trying to say? How are you trying to say it? And how do you want to make people feel? Like that's what is
love that.
consistent across all projects. Nothing matters if you're not thinking about, uh, and at least in advertising, the person you're speaking to. The same thing goes for narrative storytelling and all of it. Like, how are you trying to impact people's lives? How are you trying to impact the way they see the world? If you're not starting from that place, then it's completely backwards, and it's probably not going to be effective.
Diving into that just a bit deeper, like, do you find it challenging when you're working with maybe like a brand book or something, um, and you want to innovate on top of it? Like at some point there in history, there was a director or a filmmaker out there that got their hands on the first drone for the very first commercial. Did that person have a brand book, and like did they go out to the brand saying like, hey, I think I want to give this new technology, a drone shot, a shot?
But you want to
Like,
know like a good way to talk about this? So like, talk about a screenplay. Um,
mm,
there's some directors that shoot what's called a white script, a script where you're not changing anything at all as you shoot it. The movie is going to be exactly as the script is, and there's some people who continue iterating until the moment that someone sees the thing. My attitude is that a screenplay is, it's like your shield, it's your starting point, it's that thing you can always fall back to. Um, we are constantly trying to push the envelope and tailor something, and make it as form fitting as possible. So like the same thing goes with a brand Bible. Like that's where you start. It's like that is like the core of this brand, but you may have a story where you need to push on it, one way or the other to, in order to really serve that story as best as possible. Because you want what I oftentimes talk about with clients, with agencies, is like, uh, the one thing that you need to have is that when a spot plays in a noisy bar and you can't hear anything, you want someone to know what brand that is. You want them to see it
mm,
and understand the language, the storytelling language behind that brand. So that stuff all has to be alive in it. But that doesn't mean that you can't continue to push here and there. You just can't change everything all at once. You know.
yeah, I feel like booking.com really has lately ripped a lot of Airbnb's style. I think that like Apple kind of came in, with their own style, and they, yeah. So yeah, I get exactly what you're saying. I think that's a great draw.
Mhm.
You've directed commercials for a wide variety of clients. What's the most challenging project that you've had to work on, and how did you overcome some of those obstacles?
Hmm. It depends on how you define challenging. Um, there's some projects that are technically challenging. There's some projects that are narratively challenging. There's some that are challenging from a relationship standpoint, like working with clients that are difficult. And like, the way I say that is not from like an egotistical standpoint. Like when I'm directing spots, like I'm there to help a client achieve whatever it is they want to achieve. But if someone doesn't know what they want to achieve and won't be confident in bringing in like experts to help them get there, that's where you have difficulty. Um, I think like for me, most of the difficulty in advertising just comes from, less of it is the technical side. Like that's actually like oftentimes some of the most straightforward stuff. It's you know helping people figuring out how to help people achieve their goals in a really highly competitive world. um, it's really hard to get people to watch ads right now. It used to be
Sure.
that people had
Seven
no choice.
seconds.
They turn on the TV if they want to watch their TV show, their ads in between, and that's it. Um, so the most challenging thing with any of these projects is like differentiating yourself from everything else around you. It's like also thinking about, one thing I talk about is like, all right, what does everything else around this ad look like if it's playing on TV, for instance, or if it's on the web? Like, how are you differentiating yourself from the spot that plays before and the spot that plays after? um,
Oh, interesting.
so yeah, oftentimes it's like,
Do you usually have a sense of like where your spot will be even before filming, or like
sure.
when
Well,
you
yeah, like,
yeah.
for instance, Ford campaign that I did that played for the NHL playoffs. So when you know that, you have a good sense of like who they're targeting and what other spots are going to play in that moment. Or, um, yeah, I mean, there are plenty of examples of that. But you're always trying to be strategic because you know people can watch or do whatever they want now, and so it's like how you have to have a completely different playbook for getting people's attention.
When you it just kind of going back to what you said earlier, when you're trying to work with a client that maybe hasn't done as much as Toyota's brand Bible has done it justice, how do you kind of pull them through that process and kind of like pull out the things that you need without making them feel pressurized or yeah,
Yeah, can you
let's
ask that
go
one more
from
time?
there. Yeah, like when you're working with brands that are maybe very opinionated,
Hmm.
or clients or agencies that are very opinionated in what they want,
Hmm.
and you come across a client of yours that maybe doesn't have that firm opinionation, how do you kind of pull them through the process to get what you need without making them feel pressurized?
um, so you're asking like if I'm working with a client that doesn't know exactly where they're going, how do I make them feel confident in that?
Yeah, like what are some techniques that you draw on?
um, Well, again, it goes back to kind of my process and what I was saying earlier. Like, and it comes from asking questions. To be honest, like I spend most of my time just asking people questions. Um, you know,
Great advice.
uh, yeah. I mean, that everything comes down to listening always. Um, uh, for me, it's like breaking things down. If you have a big problem that seems daunting, breaking it down piece by piece by piece, all of a sudden things start to make sense. So, it's like taking a step back, working backwards. It's like, of course, your goal, like you want to make something that goes viral. Like that's not how that works. We go back and we say, all right, like who are you talking to, and like how are we going to empower them to want to share this piece of content? What is this
Hmm.
going to add to their life that motivates them to want to share it with the world? And when you think about things backwards that way, or think about things in terms of like incentives and psychology, then decision making becomes a lot clearer. Like whether we need to shoot something this way or shoot something that way, or like whether we need to cut this whole thing entirely and focus on this thing. It always just comes back to like who are we talking to? What motivates that person? What are we doing? How are we enriching their life? How do we want to make them feel? Um, and uh, is what we're doing in line with the messaging of your brand? Like it goes back to like, what is the mission statement for your brand? Like, how are you trying to influence culture with your brand? And making sure, because some people make there's so many pieces of content made that aren't true to a brand, and people can feel that. They can feel when people are being disingenuous.
Mm,
And there's so many examples of when a brand does something that um, isn't in line with the spirit of their brand, and they get egg on their face for it. And then there are times where you have triumphs. Like, I was talking to someone yesterday about like the Nike Colin Kaepernick work that Wyden did, where that was a perfect example of something that was in line with Nike's brand from a social justice standpoint, and they
sure.
were rewarded for that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, beautifully captured. Your film, Obey the Giant, about the early life of Shepard Fairey and the origin of the Obey Giant Street art campaign, which if anyone is not familiar with this, definitely go check it out. It's a really, really cool story. What drew you to that story initially, and what did you learn from directing it?
Um,
Because you had spent some time with him. You had spent unprecedented amounts of time with him in a very intimate setting.
mhm. Yeah.
So you got access in a way that not a lot of people have.
Yeah, I mean, I was hanging out with him every day for a whole summer. Um, I assistant edited on what was then the Obey documentary, and Shepard's always been an inspiration to me, just from the skateboarding world, and the way that he impacted skateboarding and like stickers and street art and like all of that stuff coming together. Um, and for me, a lot of my best work is just personal. Whether it be my Obey film or the film I made during the protests and riots, or whatever. Where you get an itch, where all of a sudden, like, a story just your life is feeding a story, and a story is feeding your life at the same time. Um,
Yeah.
and so in this case, I wanted there to be a film about Shepard Fairey. That was something that I wanted to see, and it didn't exist. And so I went out and made it, and luckily with his support. But what made it really personal was, I was the age that Shepard was when he was at RISD. I was doing a lot of the same stuff, um,
Whoa.
and it's funny. The process of making the film was actually getting to relive some of his life, like building the set for that film.
I remember
In
that
the
billboard,
studio.
man. That was
Yeah,
crazy seeing that on the green. Yeah.
yeah, it was so much fun.
You've worked with emerging technologies, sometimes like crazy stuff that I've never even seen or heard of. And then it just ends up like on one of my feeds one day.
Hmm.
What's your process for incorporating new technologies, and what do you think is the most exciting tech innovation in filmmaking right now?
Sorry, I was just checking Twitter because one of them is supposed to be coming out today. That I
Yeah,
talked about
okay.
it in details. Um, uh, yeah, I think it's really exciting when you get to be involved with a piece of emerging technology, or a brand that's like that's new. When you get to be in on the ground floor of that, and shaping the principles I was talking about, like shaping the story of a brand, shaping the why. Um, uh, because oftentimes in the ad world, like, an ad agency comes to you with a fully realized idea, and you're elevating or executing on that. But when you really get to start from square one with it, it's really exciting. For me, I'm just a total tech nerd. I always have been that way. Um, and it's really exciting to work on projects, or launch products that are just things that you want in your life, things that, like, you're really excited about, especially when it's like, uh, oh my god, all I have to do is just show the world that this thing exists, and it's going to explode. I don't even have to do anything. All I have to do is not get in my own way
Right,
in
right.
in telling the story. Yeah.
I love it. And is there a piece of technology out there? Feel free to check Twitter. what is that technology, and do you have any plans to incorporate it in some of your work?
Um,
Like, there's some pretty interesting stuff out there right now in the AI field. I just saved this video literally last night where you could take footage and then prompt a certain AI service, and it would overlay or cut on your behalf.
mhm.
Like, there's a maybe a part two to this talk later, just talking about that. But is there a piece of technology right now that you're excited about?
um, well, it's interesting. Like over the last, I don't know, 7 years at this point, have been looking for a really good place to, um, really good place or company or piece of technology in the blockchain crypto space, to bring kind of my principles of storytelling and advertising to that in order to help bring it to the mainstream. Because it's interesting. Like, we're very much in that early '90s phase, as with regards to where the internet was, with where blockchain crypto are today. They've just
Whoa,
gotten
yeah.
so much attention because of the ability to take ownership over them. Like, that's like the big difference. Is like, maybe TCP/IP would have been the rage if you could own a part of the plumbing of the internet back then, but you couldn't.
Mm.
And so it took a long time for that to permeate and for like the application layer of the internet to be built on that. In this case, the ability to own protocols and people becoming wealthy as a result of that has resulted in extreme exposure very early, for the crypto space. But the important thing to think about, and this all kind of is leading somewhere, is that when this space is mature and there are applications that are built on it, half the time people won't even know that things they're using are running on blockchains or running on public blockchains or
Totally.
whatever. When it's finally mature, but someone has to get us to that point of taking one of these products and saying, like, this is the why, this is how this fits into your world and enriches your life. And engineers aren't typically the best people to do that, because you're so deeply immersed in the technology and you're so in the weeds. You need someone who can take a step back and look at this and be like, all right, this is why this is actually important to people.
Interesting. So your response is almost like it's not maybe an artifact of technology, but it's the technological process of storytelling or optimizing, it seems, that has gotten better that you're excited about.
Mm, uh, I'm not sure I fully understand.
So, for example, like today, when maybe we are working with for NUMI, let's say, we're working with a email deliverability specialist. They have to warm up like 7 or 10, domains, get that out for like a month,
Mm-hmm.
and then they follow like a playbook. That playbook in it of itself is a piece of technology,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not maybe like an artifact like our iPhones or something. It's actually just a way of doing things. And so what I was comparing was the way that you were describing these storytellers kind of coming in and kind of leaning back on historical precedents. Maybe that in and of itself is the actual drive forward. Maybe it's actually not coming in the form of automatic editing or colorization or styling through AI
You need you
services.
need you need a little bit of old and a little bit of new. There's some
Mm.
things that just work really well and always have. Some of that is just down to the way that we're wired. Like, there's a reason why books are bound the way that they're bound. It's like that's the easiest way to flip through and take in this type of information. Um, uh, but you,
Every film could be in 3D, but there's a reason that they're not, you know.
um,
I know your thoughts on 3D.
well, I mean,
Or like looking at a movie and a 2.5 hour movie on your
well,
phone when it's
let's talk
like,
about that. That's an interesting thing to talk about. I don't write anything off on principle. I try to be really flexible in my thinking in general, and you have to be. Um, take, the 16 by 9 ratio and the 9 by 16 ratio. The 9 by 16
I was
ratio
really hoping this
is
would
like
come up.
one of
Yeah.
the most haunting things to most people in my position, um, simply because it's almost always an afterthought in advertising. Very rarely are you getting campaigns where someone like fully considers that aspect ratio, that vertical aspect ratio. Very, very rarely is that uh, a starting point for creating a piece of content and knowing that we're framing things for that and knowing that that's the way we're telling a story. We're choosing subject matter that fits into that aspect ratio. There is no good or bad aspect ratio. It's just, are we taking something that we shot in CinemaScope and all of a sudden they're like, we need 9 by 16, and it just destroys the work.
Right.
That's
Like in post, it's like, hey, don't forget about these shorts or these reels.
yeah.
It's like, dude, we just spent like $250,000 on this shoot. Like, you could have told me that up front.
Literally, and talk about like I've done $1 million shoots or more where like all of a sudden last second, and it's like,
What's your response to that? I mean, is it now something that with your new clients you're having to like proactively bring up
absolutely,
as like,
absolutely,
yeah,
it's so important. I mean, the unfortunate thing is that this aspect ratio is something that's been forced on us uh, by a data insight, basically by non-creators. So, very simply, I think it was at the time like Facebook saw that there was, I don't know, I may be making this up, like 60% more engagement if content, is displayed in 9 by 16. And it's interesting. It's like an insight that people acted on in terms of then like forcing content into that aspect ratio. It's an insight they're acting on, but they're failing to like maybe completely contextualize that insight. That
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
people could also just do that.
this,
Um,
yeah,
and how are you creatively enticing people to do that?
yeah.
um,
Versus
as
just
opposed
like
to just
that
being like,
24
this
by
is how
24
people use
pixel.
these, and so this is
Yeah,
how it's going to be done. Um, it's when you have non-creative people making choices that impact an entire creative field. It's really difficult to deal with. Um, when all that someone like me wants is to like start from the right place, rather than to have to work your way backwards.
it's a interesting note that you brought up about like you're almost like put in a position. One example that comes to mind where I think do you remember the game Osmosis? It's an iPhone game,
No, never
and
played it.
it made you. It's basically about a cell that absorbs other cells, and it is visually stunning, and it has a beautiful score behind it. And they tell you right up front, almost like one of the first screens is 24 by 24 pixel rotating iPhone icon, and it says, "Please rotate your phone before we can allow you into the game." It forces you to do that,
Mm-hmm.
and then it tells you to put on headphones for a better experience. I've never come across something like that,
Mm-hmm.
but it's almost like, and I'm getting goosebumps just like talking about that, because it's almost uh, like a little bit of tough love when inherently in the medium of technology is always supposed to be there for the person.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in this case, technology is kind of almost saying like, hey, I want to be there for you, but I want to put my best foot forward. Here's what this best foot looks like. Here's how
Yeah.
to get there.
Well, it's a tricky
So
thing because in an ideal world, you want everything to be frictionless. And people are what you don't want to do is create a pain point that makes someone walk away from whatever that piece of content is to the other thing, and so you have to constantly weigh that.
yeah, I think that's an excellent
But
point.
also like
Yeah.
this may be short term. It may very well be that like this is a format, like looking at this thing as as AR glasses pop out, and all of a sudden
So
we're freed
true.
again. So I'm already kind of thinking past 9:16.
Yeah, so true. Man, if we weren't brushing up on time, I'd love to actually dive deeper into that specific thing where it's like the medium itself has defined the way that we consume, whereas maybe in the future this is actually just a hiccup, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in the future it's actually like, your contact lenses have no problem displaying all types of formats depending
There are
on
a
what
lot
the
of
creator
great
themselves wanted
examples
to make.
of this, and I can do a quick one and I can move on. Is that, you take the hour 30-minute movie, you take the hour-long TV show, 30 minutes, like that. Those formats were created to fit scheduling blocks that don't exist anymore.
So what advice, I know you probably get this asked all the time, what advice would you give aspiring filmmakers, or maybe what advice would you give your younger self trying to break into industry?
I think one of the like important things is like knowing when ego is important and knowing when ego is doing you a complete disservice. And what that means more importantly is like serving whatever you're making. Like always being in service of your story, leading from behind, I think is like
I love that.
things. And that's what I do as a director. And there are things you'll see on screen, and there are the things that aren't on screen, whether it be like showing up early to a shoot day and leaving late when you can, and spending time with the people, with your crew, when they're loading in or wrapping out, being really gracious to every single person, taking the time to learn every single person's name that's working for you, which, if you're going into an office every day is a lot easier, but when you're working in production and every project you're working with a new 100 people, it's something you have to work at. So that's the first and most important thing, is like the people that I admire the most are the people that like they serve their work and their work doesn't serve them.
Julian, you have been a fantastic guest. I really want to have you on the show again. There are so many things that we brought up that I would love to talk more about. Everyone watching at home, go check out julianmarshall.tv. His work is fucking awesome. Super talented. Thank you so much. If you have a question for Julian, leave a comment down below. Please like and subscribe. Julian, any final words?
No, that's it from me. Thank you for listening.
Of course. I'm Harrison Tellion. Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Bottom Line Design. This has been Julian Marshall. See you guys later.